everyone. I would like to talk about El Camino Real and the first Spanish expeditions in Alta California, which is known today as the state of California in the United States. The reason why I chose this topic is the fact that when I moved to the Bay Area in California, I was pretty much surprised to see all these cities with Spanish names, such as Pacifica, El Granado, or Miramar, but especially the cities with saints' names, which were everywhere, like San Mateo, San Bruno, San Leandro, San Carlos. And then around them, there were all these cities with names of uh, British or Irish and Scottish origin. So one could find Burlingame, Millbrae, Oakland, Fremont, Berkeley, all around these other cities with Spanish names. But actually, what made me research into the topic is the fact that there was one day I was driving down a road with shops and apartment buildings at both sides of the road, and I kept driving for several miles, and I switched cities several times, but I was always driving down the same road. And I checked, and the road was called El Camino Real, and that road actually goes from Colma, which is up just below, just south of San Francisco, all the way to Santa Clara, which is just west of San Jose. As you can see on the picture, the whole route is about 40 miles. I think that's 55, 60 kilometers, and that would take 2 hours to drive. But that's just if you're lucky and there's no traffic, which I can tell you it's not frequent in the Bay Area at all. But I was curious about seeing such a long stretch of road spanning several cities, around 10 or so, keeping the same name all along. I was pretty sure there was a historical reason behind it, but I wanted to know more, so I went online and I researched. And obviously, there was a historical reason. And actually, the term El Camino Real in California is used to designate the trail that connected the 21 missions established by the Franciscans and the Spaniards along the Californian coastline back in the 18th century. The trail went from the southernmost point, which was the mission of San Diego de Alcalá, which is nowadays the city of San Diego, up north to the mission of San Francisco Solano, which is known today as Sonoma. So along the way, there weren't just settlements. There were also several just missions, sub missions. There were also four presidios, which were military forts and bodies of government, which had the task of protecting the areas surrounding them. And then there were also two pueblos, which were civil towns where Spanish citizens and retired military lived. The whole trail has about 600 over 600 miles, around 950 kilometers. But to understand how these settlements came to be and the path that linked all of them together, we need to travel back in time, back to the 18th century. Uh, in the 18th century, it was rumored that the Russians wanted to get to America and explore the continent, and they were coming from the north after crossing the Pacific Ocean through the Aleutian Islands. There was also English presence on the east, in the east coast, in cities such as New York, Boston, New Jersey, and also there was some French presence further up north on the east coast. So the Spaniards decided it was time to keep exploring up north from their lands in what is nowadays Mexico, to keep going north, keep exploring, keep taking lands, and figuring out if there was anything worth their time in the region. So in 1769, the first expedition took off of Mission Nuestra Señora de Loreto, which is in nowadays the city of Loreto in Baja California, in Baja California Sur in Mexico. So this expedition, which was initially led by Junipero Sierra, went up north until they settled in. They created a mission in called San Diego de Alcalá, which is nowadays the city of San Diego, and they then Sarah stayed in the city, but Gaspar de Portola and Juan Crespí kept going north. This expedition is therefore called the Portola expedition. So they decided to keep to the coastline because it was easier to keep track of the route followed, but also because at the time it was much easier to communicate to cities by sea with boats than it was to communicate and carry cargo over by land using carriages and horses. So they kept to the coastline except in those instances where the terrain was so abrupt they were forced inland. They kept going north until they found a natural barrier, and that was the entrance to the San Francisco Bay. So they decided to turn around and go south. Along the way, both up north and south, they kept scouting for places where future settlements would be interesting. Those places had to be close to settlements of natives, as the one of the emphasis of the expeditions would be future expeditions would be to convert them to Christianism, to Catholicism. The second factor was that the land had to be fertile to sustain living in the mission. In 1770, Sierra traveled by boat north towards nowadays the city of Monterey and set the Presidio of Monterey there. Portola followed him, and although the idea was to create to establish the headquarters of the missions in Alta California in Monterey, they did so in a bit further south in what was known as the mission of San Carlos de Borromeo del Rio Carmelo, which is actually known as the city of Carmels nowadays. The second expedition, known as the Dianza expedition, took place between 1774 and 1775 and 1776. Sorry. And instead of starting all the way down south, it started from the southeast, what would be the frontier between California and Arizona nowadays. So they traveled northwest till the mission of San Gabriel, and then they followed the steps of Portola. However, the scouts traveling with the Antha figured out it was much easier to travel inland as the terrain was less abrupt, and they decided to keep inland on their way north. They did take a detour to reach the Presidio of Monterey, but then they kept again inland on the way north to the peninsula. As you can see, once they reached the peninsula, the path they followed was close to the east coast, the one by the bay, and it does look pretty much similar to the road I showed you before in the peninsula. So this expedition also had as a purpose create several settlements. Among them there were the Presidio of San Francisco, the Mission of San Francisco de Asís, also known as Mission Dolores, and the Pueblo of San Jose de Guadalupe. At the time, all the roads connecting one settlement to the headquarters in the region was known as a royal path, or el Camino Real. However, when Mexico gained its independence from Spain, they decided to rename all these roads and remove this mention of the to the Spanish Kingdom. So all the roads were affected, also the ones in what is nowadays California in the United States. So one wonders how come there are still long stretches of road called El Camino Real. Well, the reason behind that is that in the 20th century there was this woman and Pitcher who thought this historical path had to be remembered, and she started an effort to do so. This effort was actually picked up by two clubs, one of them the California Federation of Women's Club, and their effort, together with the fact that cars were starting to be more common and the romantic movement at the time that idealized the Spanish colonial heritage, all those three had a role in the success of keeping the route alive. However, one of the reasons was tourism, as cars were getting common amongst the wealthy, and they were highways being built, so it was a way to use modern means of transportation to reach historical landmarks. Considering the recent the clubs decided to set up several markers along the way, 400 belts from all the way south in San Diego to Sonoma in the north. However, as I was saying, one does wonder. Okay, so there was some sort of economical reason behind this. So, what is the fact, and what is real about El Camino Real? Well, there were several facts that were said at the time, and that was that the settlements existed, and there were some sort of paths connecting all of them. However, a lot of the information said back in the 20th century wasn't true. Part of some of that information was that the markers actually, the bells actually marked the real routes connecting the different missions. That the missions were settled apart 50 kilometers or around 30 miles because it was possible to travel from one to the next in just one day by a horse, a long journey but just one day, and that the Franciscan fathers traveled along the routes pretty frequently, so that was the reason behind choosing a bedpost design that resembled the Franciscan walking stick. Well, these three are not actually true. So while the some stretches of the trail were well used, most of them were just to connect to the nearby settlements and never used for long distance travels. In that case, the water route, that of taking a boat from San Diego to Monterey, was preferred. Also, the routes were never fixed. The path from one mission to the next one changed with time as the means of transportation changed, as the weather changed, and as the tides changed. Also, it was said that, as I mentioned, it was said that the bells marked the exact path, but in fact, most of the bells missed the 21 missions, original missions. Just only one of them is close enough to an original mission. And then one wonders what's the reason behind having all these bells, all this information about a route that it's actually not that exact. Well, I do think it's interesting because when you see these bells on the road and these marks and signs saying here here the Antha expedition spent the night in this year in 1876 on their way to explore the peninsula. I find it interesting and makes you curious to know more about the history behind the expeditions, the how the El Camino came to be, and also what's the myth and what's the fact in all this. Just let me know what you think about El Camino, the expeditions, and especially these bells marking the way that it's not actually that exact. Bye.